Therapy dudes, take away your stress, put you in a good mood. If you had them over, they would eat up all your food. It's time for therapy dudes.
What's up, everybody? Hope you're doing well. It's a beautiful day in late March. We are Therapy Dudes. I'm Dan Fox with Andre Karka Maz.
Oh my God, you nailed it. Holy crap.
Nailed it.
Wow. Wow. Okay.
And we're
Keep going.
talking about parenting today. We're going to be putting a focus on how it's useful to understand how we were parented so that we're not kind of unconsciously playing out some unfinished business or, little wounds that we had, little traumatic experiences or big traumatic experiences that we had while we were growing up.
Right.
In particular with our way that we had gotten parented. Um, we are sponsored by Boulder Psychological Services. Check out boulderpsychologicalservices.com for everything therapy related. Happy to say Andre has changed his shirt today,
Oh
but
my.
it looks really, really weird because it's exactly the same as the blue shirt, except the lettering and the design is now red. So it's still a black shirt, but
Counts.
now it's with red touches.
You're making it seem like I don't bathe or something, like I just sit in the same clothes all day, every day.
I feel like your wardrobe is like five black t-shirts.
I'm working through a lot emotionally. That's just how it is right now. I just need people to know I'm struggling, you know?
And this looks like is this like a t-shirt that's related to some like game that I'm not aware of? What is
No,
no.
this is just I actually don't know what this t-shirt is. Uh,
Okay. I
but
mean it
it looks
has like a cool
well,
factor. I feel like if you were like, on a
it's got like one
motorcycle,
word right here. And then, you
yeah,
know, it's
right?
like a patch or something, right?
Yeah,
You got like a patch.
it's impressive. My
Think
t-shirts have holes in them. They're
I
old.
can put patches on that for you. We can get you to my level.
Nice, nice. I want to level up with the shirts. Um, so I want to kick off this conversation by talking about how the themes that we had discussed last week around attachment and communication style in terms of how we want to approach our kids.
Right.
It's useful to take a similar lens and try to understand what was going on when we were growing up with our parents or guardians or primary caregiver, whoever was, taking care of us at a young age, because that kind of um, unconsciously creates our sort of wired expectations for how to navigate relationships in the world, and in particular with our kids.
It creates the blueprints.
It creates the blueprints. Exactly. So, um, should we dig into attachment styles first?
Yeah, why not? That's a good place to start.
Okay. Let's quiz Andre.
Okay.
Name and describe the attachment styles as they relate to our parents.
My dad was avoidant for sure.
No, that's next podcast.
Oh,
This
okay.
podcast we're doing theory, so you can't personalize it yet.
Oh, well, my dad was avoidant, so okay. So,
What does that mean?
well, the avoidant attachment style, it's a attachment style marked by um, avoidance in general around communication, around difficult topics. They hear everything kind of as criticism, like they see communication as like fighting. Sometimes when things are brought up, it feels like fighting. They feel like they got to defend themselves. And at the root of it, they want to feel like they're not messing up. So this is why that they have this response. It's kind of a reactivity because it's coming from a like I'll never be good enough, maybe, or like some kind of wound in the background like that. But avoidant is really frustrating because you'll be trying to explain maybe as a child or a partner, uh, something basic like, "Hey, this really hurt my feelings," and they'll kind of shut down and be like, "Well, you do this," and they'll kind of put a wall up, and you might feel like you're talking to a wall. If you want to add anything to that, I want to make sure we get everything.
Right, right. So I think how that plays out with our parenting style, right? If we were parented from an avoidant perspective, then we may have less of an awareness of our own
Avoiding.
emotions, our own
Yeah.
avoidance,
Yeah.
right? Because if we contrast that with the secure attachment, right? The secure attachment style creates this feeling that like you're welcome, your emotions are welcome. It's safe to talk about this stuff. We can work through this stuff, and that's going to help us stay connected and get more connected. So if, during our developmental early childhood stages, we don't have that kind of backbone, it sort of, like you said, it's like a blueprint for how we're going to navigate future relationships. So we may not really be in touch with our own emotions around um, what's going on in the relationship, and we may not realize that we're avoidant when it comes to expressing that stuff. And especially as men, I think it's easy to kind of go to this place of like, I'm just not like an emotional. I just don't, I'm not like
I'm
a
just a
feeler.
problem solver.
Yeah, I just kind
Yeah.
of like take care of stuff, and I don't really have that going on,
Yeah.
which is arguably, a gender difference, but I think there's a bit of a cop out in there too.
Socialized a little bit.
Yeah, socialized, and it it's really not good to lean into that, I think, as a parent, as justification for why you don't need to be more emotionally attuned and open with your kids and in other future relationships, because that's part of what builds connection. And if we're just kind of hanging out and being avoidant, it it sort of feels like we're orbiting around our kids. And they are certainly emotional creatures and trying to figure out, what's okay, what's not okay. And the implicit message is that it's not really cool to talk about emotions, especially ones that might be a little uncomfortable, little
Just
extreme.
shun,
Yeah, yeah.
kind of shut down.
Or anything that's not like easily fixed should just be,
Yeah.
ignored, not
Yeah.
talked about.
Yeah. And then there's anxious attachment. And I'll speak a little bit on that behalf too. Anxious attachment is marked by like a fear of abandonment, a fear of like also not being good enough in a different way, right?
Yeah.
It's the sense that you need to stay in touch. You need to have lots of check-ins with your partner or your child or whatever, right? You need to make sure we're on the same page. We're good. Are you leaving me? Like that kind of rhetoric is kind of leading this type of attachment style. And then oftentimes, with anxious attachment, if you don't feel like you can anticipate what's going on with another person, it's that void starts to be filled up with a bunch of narratives about like, oh, they're losing interest or they're not doing well or something bad's going to happen. Or I'm just using it in a general sense, not just with parents to children. But a lot of times people with anxious attachment are they're overgivers. They want to please their partners, kind of letting go of their own needs. This could be like a hoovering parent if we're trying to make it a parenting style, right? Like the type of parent who wants to make sure that their child's doing good and loves them and like constantly worry that the child's going to make mistakes and, get hurt in the real world.
Did you say
Uh,
hoovering parents?
did I say hoovering parent? I think I did.
I think you did.
Hovering.
Hovering. Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Like
I
the
don't know.
helicopter parent.
Yeah.
Okay. I
Was
just,
hoovering a word? Did I just make that up?
I mean, I
Maybe
think
it's
it's
a
like
word.
there's a vacuum. So, like
Oh
the
yeah.
Hoover vacuum. I was
Oh yeah,
worried.
they suck every well maybe I don't
But all right. The hovering parent. Sorry,
Yeah.
go on. Go on.
Okay, thank you. Um essentially these people with this attachment style need to feel like they're giving something to someone that no one else can provide. And once that is being taken away, or they're not feeling like they're able to do that, or they're not feeling like they can connect with that person in a way where they're providing something that that person needs, they
Yeah.
really feel anxious. They have a hard time sitting with the unknown, right? They need lots of check-ins. I need to be able to provide something. I need to be there. I need to be on point. Um, and the hovering parent is a good example of that from parent to child. I think this attachment style comes from emotional neglect, I would assume, and feeling confused when you're younger. I think disorganized attachment is really the hallmark of like, this is, I don't understand anything relational, right? Like it's very hot and cold,
Well, and disorganized has typically some, traumas attached to it. There might be
typically,
parent loss, there might be parent estrangement through divorce, there might
right?
be abuse going on in the house.
The hot and
Um,
cold, yeah, like I love you, and then I hate you, and then you're good enough one moment, and then,
right,
yeah,
but it's like beyond that, which could still be part of like anxious attachment. It's to the point where it gets like scary and kids start to like disassociate and try to just
yeah,
like, separate themselves from what's going on in the environment by just sort of like tripping out in their mind or just freezing up and kind of not
yeah.
really connecting at
It's like a
all.
freeze response in terms of attachment.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Um, through like, stuff that feels threatening. Whereas I think with the anxious one, that's much more of like inconsistent or feeling insecure, right? Inconsistent connection. Um, Sometimes the problem with the anxious attachment is that sometimes it's good. I mean, that's not actually the problem, but in terms of somebody playing out their attachment style later in life, if you're anxiously attached, you are constantly distressed
that's
because you don't
correct.
know what to expect. If you had an avoidant attachment experience growing up, it's different because you knew what to expect, which was not much. So you could kind of organize a response that was sort of like appropriate to the sort of consistent way that you were getting, parented without much
Right.
attention, support, emotional support. So that that plays out as distance, but it doesn't play out as this like insecurity that needs constant reassurance that, is constantly like elevated nervous system worried about all this stuff.
Yeah.
Right. So it's a weird thing because I think, on the one hand, you did get some positive attention. There's probably some, part of you and experiences of knowing what that feels like, but it was never stable enough to, be able to really relax and trust that that was the world you were living in.
Are we talking about avoidant there or insecure anxious?
Insecure, right? Insecure is a tricky one to deal with. Um,
Yeah.
anyway,
Hmm.
I know we want to jump into the communication styles really fast too
Well,
before we wrap up this podcast. But oh yeah, what are you gonna?
well, I was just gonna say maybe it would be helpful to help parents understand how we breed these attachment styles into our children. Like what we do that can make them anxious or avoidant or secure or disorganized, right? It might be good to kind of hear like a little breakdown of each, like what would be something to do to help a child feel more secure rather than these other attachment styles.
Right, right. Didn't we like crush that last week though, or am I doing?
Kind of, but we're talking about it again. I feel like
All
we
right, yeah, yeah. Dig in more. What's
well like so I think we're really talking about attunement. When we're talking about attachment styles, we're talking about how well we attune to our children and what they've absorbed from our interactions, right?
yeah,
So if you want a child to not to be more secure in general, learn to understand where they're coming from, right? Learn to not be reactive. Learn to not be hot and cold, right? Regulate your own emotions, right? Around responses that are sometimes ridiculous, right?
yeah. And I think part of learning how to, adjust that stuff is first kind of like taking stock and reflecting on what happened to you growing up and also on what you think is going on in your habitual patterns with your kids so that there's there's an awareness that this is something I want to change because that's right. Like even though attachment styles are, sort of laid out in early childhood, there's still some evolution of that as they go into their like pre-adolescence and adolescence years. So it's never too late to
Yeah.
some repair work with that if we
Yeah,
want to.
attachment changes, by the way, over time. It takes work, right? But attachment isn't, I mean, disorganized is a little bit difficult because you're right, there's a trauma element that you got kind of got to work through. But in
Yeah.
general, attachment is malleable. You can work towards secure attachment.
Yeah, yeah. But as a, I don't know, sort of like young adult doing that, or as a parent helping their like teen do that,
Right.
I think it's important to understand that the habitual energy usually starts with that like either avoidant impulse or the anxious impulse, if that's what we grew up with at a younger age. And if we're aware of it and we're conscious of how we want to show up, we can do some self-soothing. We can remind ourselves of what we want to be doing this in these relationships and of like that awareness that this is habitual energy and it's not actually, what's in front of us, right? We're not just living out the past. And through a process like that, we can continue to move forward. But it's not like we just like wipe the slate clean and rebuild from ground zero, right? That wiring is still in place. If we're aware of it, we can work with it and wire some farther experiences that can help us navigate through that to where we want to be.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, I think the communication tendencies really tie into attachment style, because we do have different types of like, we're either acknowledging and co-creating with our kids, or we're shutting them down, or we're avoiding them, right? And like those communication styles in essence translate to an attachment style over time in the children.
Right. It's almost like the communication styles are like the little micro experiences, and then what grows is the attachment style over time.
Yeah, if I'm constantly passive aggressive and don't acknowledge the underlying theme of what's going on in the family or between my child and I, they're going to learn to be avoidant. They're going to
Right.
learn that they're going to be shut down. That's how we do things. We don't talk about how we feel. If we do, it's scary because I've never really been modeled how to do that. It feels like the wrong territory to go in with other people, right? Because it's heavier than it really should be. But that's
Right.
coming from a childlike place in us. Like avoidance is really coming from a childlike place in us.
Right. Right.
We're
So,
anxious,
and as we look at that, like with our, if we were parented that way,
right?
right, or any of the styles, right, any of the attachment or communication styles, if we're parented that way, it's an early modeling that gives us kind of a go-to in our own, present day experiences when a similar enough situation comes up, right? Where our natural inclination might be to, accidentally respond the same way our parents responded, which is why it's useful to really kind of like look into our past to understand what was going on so that we're conscious of it and can make better choices in the present.
Right.
So with that um, passive aggressive style, right, it tends to create in a young kid this hyper focus on trying to interpret these inconsistent signals. So, our nervous system energy is raised up and we're just kind of hunting for like inconsistencies or, if there's resonance between body language and what somebody is verbally saying. And that creates this whole like structure in our brain where we can just kind of over focus on that stuff and not
Right.
trust
The
an
incongruence.
expression. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I think it's really dangerous to be incongruent with your children. I really do. I think it's dangerous to not show accountability, like in conflict, especially with your spouse or other adults or even with your children, because the incongruence is something that you wire into them as like, this is how we do life. This is how we do relationship. This is how we communicate in these ways. It doesn't become about like, for instance, not taking accountability example. It doesn't come about the pursuit of truth. It becomes about how can I win this? How can I deflect? How can I make sure I'm not a bad person in this, right?
Yeah, yeah. And to real quick go through the communication styles, right? We've got the assertive
Right.
style, which is kind of similar to, what would create secure attachment, where we are wanting to constantly project this sort of warmth, welcoming, wanting to understand what's going on, wanting to be a support. The passive aggressive one that we're talking about tends to create that anxious attachment. The passive communication style tends to create this avoidant attachment. And then the aggressive communication style is the one that's like, I'm right. I need obedience. There could be some like, fear energy put in there, threats. Um, and, if it gets to the point where there's abuse going on and trauma, then we've got that disorganized attachment going on. It certainly is going to create some anxious attachment because you don't know if somebody's going to explode on you,
Right. You're
even if
ruling by
it's
fear.
verbal. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, ironically, even if we have that energy and we know what it's like to grow up in fear, because we haven't seen other, experiences on the home front, it's like that's accidentally in our bones as this like reflective behavior or energy. Um, so it's one that we have to kind of consciously be aware of, notice that it's coming up, and try to avoid acting out of like anger or an elevated nervous system and playing that out with our kids. The reason why this is so strong is getting back to what we talked about last time on mirror neurons, where if somebody that we're in close relationship with is experiencing an emotion, it's not just that we understand it, it's that that emotional center in our brain is also firing. So we actually experience the anger or the sadness or the loneliness or the joy, right? When someone close to us is experiencing it too. So if we grow up around anger, we have those, internal experiences of anger coming up sometimes too.
Yeah. Well, I feel like we kind of summed it up pretty well here. I
Yeah,
think that like the overarching theme here is understand what you experienced as a child, understand how it's translating in your expectations of your own children, right? Like I can give one personal example. I know the next podcast is going to be more personal, but as I'm a father now, and as I move through fatherhood and I start to express certain things and expect certain things from my children, I notice I have similar tendencies to what my parents had. And I didn't know that that would happen because I've told myself my entire life, I'm not going to do it that way, right?
right.
But you play out what you've kind of been modeled. It's like unconsciously, it just starts
Yeah,
to come out. And it's important to catch that and be like, okay, what just happened here?
right, right. And we play it out more. I like how you said that. We play it out more when we have this sort of unprocessed, kind of unfinished business, which is why, really becoming conscious of it isn't just this exercise in going back and reliving the pain. It's trying to understand how that stuff impacts our ability to show up consciously in the present. And it can help us figure out what intentions we want to have in the present and what we've got to work on to make sure that we manifest those intentions.
Absolutely.
All right. Hope you enjoyed. Like and subscribe. Leave a comment. Talk to you next time.
Therapy dudes, take away your stress, put you in a good mood. If you had them over, they would eat up all your food. It's time for therapy.